I'm going to show you how I cut perfect openings in injection molded bodies. I'm in the process of building an old school 80s style Tamiya Cloudbuster, and one of the things I want to do to it is add the blower assembly from this Muscle Machines engine. I want to have it come up through the hood to give it a more realistic look. Now, of course, I could take this blower assembly and I could just attach it to the top of the hood, but that won't look right at all. Or I might even be able to get away with the indentation that comes in the stock body, but you know what? It still doesn't give me the look that I'm going for. It's more realistic, but not realistic enough. So what I'm going to do is show you how I'm going to take the dimensions of this blower assembly, transfer it to the hood, and use that information to cut a hole out that's perfect for this blower assembly. Here's what I have going on, and it looks a little bit like chaos. It kind of is, but it isn't. This is just kind of my markup here, so I kind of know where the opening has to be, where the cuts have to be, and so on. So what I did was I started with the back. I knew I needed to find the back of the blower, and I wanted it to be in the same spot that it was in the original Cloudbuster body. Right, that's an easy point to start with. We know where that is. We know it's square and straight and so on. Once I got that line marked with my tape, I marked the center of the hood with another piece of tape because the blower is going to be centered in the hood. So if I measure this width and it's a 1 inch, then I'm going to divide that by 2 and go a ½ inch off of each side. So you see what I'm getting at there. The other thing I did too is I added 1/16 of an inch to all of my dimensions all the way around. So I have a little bit of a gap just to have it more realistic, right? So think about this hood. If the hood comes down over the engine, if it has a, comes down this way or it has a tilt nose, it needs to clear all the points that are the furthest out on the blower assembly. So that's what I did. I marked all those pieces for the cutout. So once I get the center line, I measured the width of the scoop, marked that with a piece of tape. Now I know where the width is. Then this fuel rail had to get brought into that dimension, so I measured and found the back of the fuel rail, and I know the width of the fuel rail, and so I used some tape just to kind of give it a little bit of an angle there. I might even continue that angle on to the back, so I know where that is. Then I went and measured the back of the fuel rail has this assembly here, and I do a cutout behind that there, so that's what I did. I took all the dimensions from this, again added a 1/16 all the way around, and marked that location for that cutout. And then of course I have the pulley in the front of the engine, so I marked roughly where that pulley is going to be. And now I actually have this piece here for the fuel line. That's kind of floating around, and I don't really have a hard mount to measure from, so I will cut that out later. So I'll get the whole thing cut out roughly, and then I'll cut that later, and I'll know exactly where that has to be. But yeah, this is very rough, but this is kind of what I started with, and this is how I figured out where all my points are. Now I'll go ahead and cut some of this tape up, clean up the lines, and then you'll get a better idea of what I'm doing. Now you can get a better idea of what I'm doing for a cutout. I cleaned up all my lines, cleaned up the tape, and I added tape around the cutout area so I'm not confused by gaps here and there. Now the next thing to do is kind of figure out how I want to cut this out. All right, so now it's time to cut the hole out of the hood, and before I do any cutting at all, I'm going to address the inside corners. I like to have rounded corners on any inside corner, so I'm going to start by addressing that, and I'm going to do that with a 1/8 inch drill bit to give me a 16-inch radius. So I went ahead in all the corners and I marked the centers with a pair of calipers and a pencil. By the way, I'm using a pencil to do all the marking on the hood because the pencil gives me a nice fine line, more precise than like a marker or something that's wider. So I've been using a pencil the whole time to mark up everything, and it sands off easy and so on. But yeah, so what I'll do is now I'm going to go ahead and drill an 1/8 inch hole in all the inside corners, and then what we'll do is we'll connect all those holes by cutting out the center section later with probably a cutoff wheel and then some sanding drums, and we'll clean it up. But let's start by drilling the holes in a corner, and we're going to do that in a kind of a weird way. Anytime you drill into a flat surface, it's a good idea to use a center punch or something similar to mark the exact location where that drill has to go, and it'll keep it from walking around. And this body's no different, but instead of using a center punch, I'm a little concerned that it might damage the body, with all the pressure on it. So what I'm going to do instead of using a center punch is just use a body ream. It has a very, very sharp corner. It'll dig into the plastic really well, and it'll give the drill bit something to kind of guide it through. I'm not going to go all the way through with it. I'm just going to use it just enough to give my drill bit some guidance. And then I'm going to do the drilling by hand. I have this chuck here that I have for my power screwdriver. It has a little bit of weight to it, and it's really easy to turn thanks to its diameter. So I'll be using this to drill into the body, do it by hand, so that way I have full control and I can take my time and make sure the hole is 100% correct. You can use a drill to do this, but it might walk, or you might have some issues with it grabbing the plastic and so on. This is just a little more precise, a little easier. And if you have a rotary tool, you could do that as well. But again, you're looking at some sketchiness, especially with the RPM of the rotary tool. So I like to do it by hand when possible. Alright, so now I have all the holes drilled on the inside corners of the body. Unfortunately, I'm not able to do it here because I don't have a lot of material to work with. So what I'll do is I'll just blend that in later with a file. It doesn't have to be perfect and doesn't have to be exactly the same as the other ones. So I'll just clean that up with a file later. It'll be just fine. Now, some of these holes I'm off very slightly, and that's just because I'm a knucklehead and didn't really put the body ream in the right place. Like this one's really far off, and this one's maybe a little off, and this one's a little off, and that's okay. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have these little issues here and there, and it's how you fix those issues that really is what matters. So what I'm going to do with these is I'll take my 1/8 inch drill bit, I'll throw it in my rotary tool, and I'll just use that as a ream in a way to just ream this hole back to where it should be. Same with this one, just kind of massage it. Use a low RPM, just take my time, massage it until it's in the right spot, and then we'll be able to move on to the next step. All right, now we're going to do a rough cut of the opening, and I'm going to do that with a rotary tool and a cutoff wheel. I'm not looking to get all the way up to the edges of the opening. I just want to do a rough cut, maybe an 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch inside my final dimension, just to be able to get a sanding disc in there later. We'll use that to clean up a majority of the hole, and then we'll switch over to sanding sticks. Now you can see what I'm talking about when I say I cut a rough opening. It doesn't need to be pretty, and it doesn't need to be perfect. You just need to stay away from the final lines and get a hole cut out of the center of the hood. Now we'll go in with a sanding drum, not a sanding disc, but a sanding drum, and we'll clean up around the edges, and we'll try to get the cuts as close as possible to the final line. And then we can come in and clean up later with some sanding sticks, just to finalize the hole and get it nice and smooth and perfect. These are the two sanding drums that came with my Dremel when I got it, and this is what we'll use to clean up the edges the best we can in the hole that we just cut. The large diameter one I'll use in the wider, longer areas. It does a very good job of removing material and getting things cleaned up pretty quick and evenly. And then I'll go into the corners with the smaller sanding drum if need be, and then we should have a nice clean opening. I'm ready to start finalizing the opening in my hood. I'm going to use the large sanding drum to start with because it removes a little bit more material. It's a little bit easier to control. And then in the corners, right, we'll go to the smaller sanding drum to get closer to our final dimensions there. What I'll do is I'll use about half of the RPM range of the rotary tool, and I'll let the sanding drum do the work. I'm not going to force it into the material. I'm just going to take light passes until it gets down to where I need it to be. And the other thing I'm going to do too is I'll be sanding from the inside of the body. That way, if for some reason I happen to slip, it'll scuff the inside of the body and not the outside. If you do work on the outside of the body and you scuff up the outside, it's okay, you can fix that. That's not the problem. It just takes more time. What I just showed you was a little bit of the sanding that I did with the rotary tool and the sanding drum, sped up. And I did it in just a few spots. I just wanted to give you a quick idea of how I do it with light passes, letting the sanding drum do the work. The rest of it I did off camera only because I couldn't see what I was doing. But now the hole that we have for our blower assembly is cleaned up. It's a lot better than it was. All that's left to do now is to go in with a sanding stick. This is a 120 240 sanding stick. I use these sanding sticks for everything. I'll put a link in the description so you guys can check them out. But what I'll do is just take the sanding stick and just go along the edge and just sand along the edge until I get close to that tape line and get everything nice and cleaned up and straight. And again, we're going to let the sanding stick do the work. Right? Not a lot of need for high pressure. And then the smaller areas, we have these smaller sanding sticks that'll take care of that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, finish up this hole, and then we'll wrap things up. Now that's pretty much all there is to cutting a hole out in an injection molded body. Remember a couple things, right? It's not as hard as you think it is. Don't be intimidated by it. If you make a mistake, make the hole too big, square up the corners and so on, you can fix that. Go to your local hobby shop, buy some styrene. Comes in sheets in different sizes and shapes. You glue it in place with some CA glue and go back to sanding and fixing it. Or if you're like, you know what, I don't want a hole at all, same thing. Get some styrene sheet, make it in the shape of the hole that you cut out, glue it in place, put a little filler down, and nobody will even know it was there. So now I have a nice opening for the blower assembly that I want to put into the body, and it looks very good. I do have some minor tweaks I want to make to the front where the pulley is and the belt, just to give it a little more clearance, and also I have to do this piece, this cutout for the side piece here, and that's about it. But overall, that's how you do it. If there's anything I left out and you have any questions, just mention it in the comment section and I'll take care of that there. And if you're local to my hobby shop in Union, Georgia, and you want to do something like this and you have questions, come on into the store. I'll be happy to help you out, show you how I do things, show you some of the tools. And if there's something that you're trying to do that you can't get past, bring it in and I'll help you get past that point and you can move forward with your own project.